Cineboys to Cinemen, episode 61.
61.
Hope you're well, whatever you are.
Whatever you are.
I mean, I guess that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Wherever you are, whatever you're doing. This week, The Substance.
Yes.
The sophomore effort from writer-director Coralie
Farjar.
That's it. I think we've got a real track record of fucking up names. So
I maybe just a pre-warning. We might still have got it wrong. You never know.
we did check.
Yeah, we did.
But I don't know. I don't know. We're going to talk about her career, her previous film, Revenge, as well, which we've just finished watching together.
Yeah, this second, yeah.
A bit of a weird film to watch this early in the day. It's only just lunchtime.
It's quite a nice day outside as well.
Yeah,
the shutters are closed, and we watched a sort of film set in the desert, a sort of rape revenge film, which was tough watch in terms of the viscerality. But
So we're going to get into that as well, because I think there's a lot of sort of thematic through lines throughout both of her films. I think.
Yes, yeah.
I think would be good to discuss. And then we're going to have a little talk about body horror films in general.
Okay, cool.
And then maybe a little bit about satire. In film and how that's sort of changed, certainly now in the sort of A24 movie era.
Yeah, definitely.
So all that to look forward to.
Oh, can't wait.
Let's just do it.
Let's go.
Questing the cinematic void.
So let's kick things off with a little natter about body horror.
Okay, nice.
As The Substance is, a body horror film. Really. It's that subgenre, isn't it? As I was watching it, and it's not exactly a particularly, I think a lot of people have said this, but the influence of people like Cronenberg is clear.
Completely. Oh yeah. Like The Fly. I mean, it's just it just like smacks of it at points, like in a positive way.
Yeah, agreed.
But the influences are very kind of laid bare, really.
Yes, agreed. And I think they probably become less subtly deployed as the film goes on, but more of that later. But I sort of felt like Videodrome, particularly. I just thought it was a good opportunity to talk about that because it's a sort of sub-genre within the sort of horror umbrella that I'm not sure we've talked about a great deal.
No.
And it's a particularly interesting one in terms of the way it is used to convey, obviously, our relationship with the body.
Yeah.
But how our body, certainly in the case of The Substance, the relationship between culture and the feminine body.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Chiefly the aging of the feminine body. But in the case of Cronenberg, I think there's probably quite a bit about the feminine body too, particularly in Videodrome. But I think it's also like a way of sort of posing sort of questions about the possible implications of fusing the body with technology. Both in the sort of very literal but also kind of metaphorical sense.
Man, it's been a while since I've seen Videodrome. I loved it. I've seen it once. I absolutely loved it. And it kind of played on the paranoia of people's kind of advancing technology, for sure. I remember that much. And obviously just paranoia. And you could kind of argue that a film like The Substance does something similar, but not with technology, but with attitudes. And I suppose like the futility of controlling the body. Although Videodrome does that as well. The Fly definitely does that. I think The Fly is interesting because it doesn't. I'm struggling to think of its overarching themes because it's very science fiction-y, isn't it? And it's kind of a brilliant inventor testing out this brand new kind of teleportation invention.
That's it, yeah.
And so I suppose it's a bit about ghosts in the machine, and then just there's one thing he didn't take into account when he was building it, in that what happens if two organisms were in the machine.
Yeah.
But like what to you does that mean in terms of the sort of themes of it?
I think you're right. The primary theme is technology, right?
Yeah.
Or sort of, I guess, the kind of ideas of what we perceive as grotesque.
Yeah.
And fusing it with such a lowly creature.
Yes, yeah.
I always found that, the sort of, I guess, in terms of Cronenberg's filmography more broadly, it's certainly got some of the more sort of striking imagery in it, in terms of the sort of slow nature of the transformation, which you sort of rightly pointed out is something that she sort of liberally borrows from.
Yeah.
Particularly in the latter stages of The Substance. But, there is something about there, isn't it, about the way, the sort of the nature of that transformation, saying something about the way we perceive beauty and horror, and the way we treat some things with reverence and other things with disgust.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of carries over to things like Videodrome, but I guess Videodrome is more of a sort of less. I mean, it is about technology, but it's the sort of technology to entertain, and sort of how the technology
it enslaves us. Is that
sort of? Yeah, I think it. How it sort of desensitizes us, and particularly to things like obviously like violence and things that should shock people into sort of effective action. But kind of leaves us in some kind of like horrifying sort of stasis where we suddenly become quite comfortable with the sort of violence that we're consuming.
Okay.
Yeah, real violence,
Yeah, man, I need to rewatch Videodrome, but I do remember liking it, but I just, thanks for kind of refreshing my memory about the themes, because I broadly just remember it being a paranoid thriller.
It is an incredibly paranoid film, and I think certainly like looking at it from our perspective now, where it is becoming increasingly more likely that technology is sort of fusing with the human form. Yeah, there's all this talk about microchips, and even like glasses. I think obviously,
Oculus.
Those kinds of things. Obviously, they're not part of the human body, but they they sit on the human body, and they're like a sort of constant feature, and that's going to be something that is going to directly impact the way we interact with the world around us.
Yeah.
There's still obviously phones have made things like, or sort of smartphones, I should say, have made the technology, or I guess more like the internet, feel like this omnipresent force that's just everywhere.
I suppose in a way they have kind of fused with us, haven't they?
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's always in my pocket. I am quite conscious of that.
Yeah,
I'll make a point of taking it out in the car and at work and stuff, because it's right there. It's weird to me.
If I go to the toilet and I'm, I kind of go, oh, where's my phone?
Oh, right, yeah. I know, I definitely know. I know exactly what you mean. I haven't left the house without my phone in a really long time.
Yeah, so in a way it is attached to us. It's
completely,
not.
Yeah.
It's not a sort of, obviously it's not a literal sort of fusion of technology and body in the way that Videodrome explores, or the way that technology is probably going to go down. But it is this idea that it is there, and it has sculpted the way in which we perceive broader culture. The way we perceive just society more generally. Yeah. Particularly around things that schisms in society, but that political or sort of issues around identity and stuff. I feel like the sort of smartphone has played a crucial role in widening that gulf. And almost dehumanizing people, I think. But there's still a sense that from with this kind of technology that you can separate yourself from it. To a degree. But I guess we're getting closer to that idea that you are going to be sort of fused with it, and I think the way in which that will change us, and the way how it will change the way we interact with others or perceive our environment. I think Cronenberg was really, obviously, incredibly
he was ahead of his time.
I think he's a real. I mean, I think a lot of people would agree with us in saying that he's one of the great horror filmmakers.
And also a filmmaker in general. I mean, his films that aren't horror-based are also fantastic as well.
Yeah, like History of Violence is a fucking banger, isn't it?
Yeah, man.
I even really like Eastern Promises. Like, I know a lot of people that really don't like that movie, but I think it's great.
I enjoyed it. I remember when that came out, actually. Maps to the Stars, is that?
Yeah,
I liked that.
I liked that.
I need to see A Dangerous Method. I haven't seen that. That's another.
Is that
Keira Knightley?
Yeah, I haven't seen that. Actually.
No, yeah. But anyway, sorry. Back to body horror.
No, you're right. He is a filmmaker that has transitioned really well. But I think his heyday is definitely in that genre.
Oh yeah.
Or certainly his impact that he's left, I guess, on the medium more broadly would be in horror.
Yes, completely.
Even though I love his other films, or the films I have seen, which is pretty much all of them, bar A Dangerous Method.
Yeah.
The idea of that, and I actually haven't seen his newest one.
Oh, me neither. No,
which is also a body horror. It's like a return to him, which probably would have been to our benefit to watch before we did this episode.
Yeah. There we go. No, if I'm kind of thinking back to The Fly, which weirdly I remember a lot more than Videodrome. It's sort of about playing God, I suppose, isn't it? And when humanity has finally got a grasp on something previously untenable or not, or like almost unthinkable, then if you play with it wrong, it's a cautionary tale. I suppose.
Yeah, it's a tale as old as time, certainly within horror and sci-fi.
Yeah,
but I think Cronenberg gives it a sort of a real really visceral feel. The sort of the nature of the transformation. It is fucking so grotesque.
Oh god,
so ugly. It's such an ugly process.
Yeah,
which is sort of Cronenberg's bread and butter, really. He's really good at making that sort of wet-looking sort of piles of sort of viscous, bile and secreting sort of wet skin and all that sort of stuff. I remember thinking that he did do. He took a stab at Naked Lunch.
Did he?
The Burroughs novel.
Yeah,
and I'm a big fan of the novel, and I really liked the movie. I thought he really captured the sort of horror. To me, it's like a match made in heaven, Burroughs and Cronenberg. But I remember thinking that some of his creature design was like, it's just that he has sort of cornered that style of being able to make some of the most disgusting looking sort of creatures and afflictions on the human form after they've been sort of fused with this kind of technology. The technology always feels sort of like biomechanical. It's not like polished and and shiny like in a lot of other sci-fi films. It's very much a part of that body, and it goes back to what you're saying about the sort of cautionary tale element of his films, that it really sort of stamps it home, but in a really sort of visceral, almost meaty way, which makes it all the more unsettling, I think.
And also, I like how he makes you like the characters first, like the character Gina Davis and Jeff Goldblum, embark on this like sort of quite steamy affair, don't they?
Yeah,
and then so you're kind of you almost want that to continue. It gets rudely interrupted
by this
by a fly,
vomiting all over people's arms and melting them.
That's right,
spoiler. I think that sort of dehumanization is central to those films. It's a sort of genre that, in a way, I'm trying to think of like more modern examples. I think more modern examples seem to be more spectacle focused. And I think about something like Slither.
Oh yeah, okay, James Gunn.
Yeah, like
it's quite a schlocky little movie.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that like he needs to replicate Cronenberg's sort of thematic density, but like it feels like the body horror. Obviously, it has the sort of propensity to be that. It doesn't have to be that. It can be a sort of schlocky affair, but in more recent efforts, it sort of feels like it's been subject to a lot of homage.
Yeah, okay.
I'm thinking of what's that Nicolas Cage one. Really neon-y one.
Colour Out of Space?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I remember thinking the same thing. It was like, this is all good and all, but
Lovecraftian.
Yeah, exactly.
Stuff.
Yeah.
No, I agree. Yeah, I think the viscerality of the Cronenberg's work can be seen sort of spread across the lawn of cinema, I suppose, a little bit. Yeah. And it's difficult to ignore. Definitely in the case of the film we just watched, actually. Although slightly less so than The Substance. This was less kind of body horror and more body injuries, quite a lot.
Yeah, it was certainly. Yeah, I was actually. I mean, I want to obviously save the majority of this for the latter part of the discussion.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I was sort of surprised how not that I was comfortable watching it. I think I said in the outro of last week's episode that I find if I'm not in the right mood for violence, I really will try and avoid it in certain films.
And
I went into the cinema and I was sort of feeling like that. I was like, fuck, I really don't know if I'm going to enjoy this on that basis.
Yeah.
But it always ends up being quite a sort of cathartic experience. Which I quite enjoy. And obviously the film is, it has its grim moments for sure, but I was struck by, I don't know, how comparatively tame it was to the sort of buzz around it. The sort of discussions around the film were very much like, this is one of the most disgusting films ever made. It's really going to shock you and haunt you. And even in The Watershed, they do that thing where people write in cards and they put their opinions up on this little whiteboard. And I really like reading them, but I made the mistake of reading it beforehand.
Oh mate, the folly of expectation.
Yeah. And a lot of people were sort of saying, "God, this is really grim." And I thought, wow, to see a film that's obviously this popular, that's apparently this grim, it's quite something. It's not been anything, that's not happened for a long time.
No.
And I was obviously, it's a grim film. It is undoubtedly quite a sort of gory experience, but it's not the kind of stomach churning experience I was expecting to have.
No, it wasn't as relentless. Like there's moments of quiet in it, and not reflective moments, but there are definitely moments where it quietens down, even more so than her previous film, Ray Wenge. Yeah, I think it's more successful at replicating that, like, almost, I don't know how to describe it. It's like squirm of eels feeling.
Yeah.
When you see viscera on screen,
yeah,
it always reminds me of my internal organs at present intact. And you know, and just like the kind of nasty feeling of knowing that, I don't know, if you sort of shifted to the right, they all kind of take a while to follow. Yeah, you know, obviously we're sort of sacks of flesh, aren't we? And it's quite uncomfortable to be reminded of that.
Exactly. Yeah. I think, you know, there is so much that is done in society to sort of help us forget that.
Yeah,
that we are just sacks of flesh and organs. You know, it's, you know, as easily dismembered as the sort of the food we consume.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Exactly,
and again, I think that goes back to what we sort of talk with Cronenberg. There is that sort of fleshiness that, you know, even sort of like, I'm going to shoehorn it in, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre sort of conveys that idea. There are body horror elements in that film.
Yeah, I was thinking Saw as well. And
exactly.
Kind of,
you know,
like transitioning into that kind of. I think that's a different genre, but it has elements of it.
Of course,
sure.
like I think Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There is a sort of, you know, a few sort of critics at the time picked up on that sort of criticism, well, not criticism, but that exploration of like the meat industry and its sort of, you know, I'm not pushing an agenda here, but you know, the way the film presents the sort of the way that the human form is just hung up, disregarded and hung up from a hook. You know, it's like a sort of comment on the nature of the way, you know, the disregard of the sort of sentience of the, you know, animal life or whatever. I don't know. It's an interesting reading of that, but you know, and you're right to say that it, you know, it does sort of permeate and it does take different forms and different sort of genres. But primarily, I would say that, you know, the body horror is sort of, you know, the more, you know, the proper body horror films are more, you know, using the human body to reflect on the way the body interacts with the environment. The way the body is then subsequently viewed by the people within that environment, and the cultural standards that are born from that interaction and that interplay between technology and the physical form. Which, you know, I think, you know, Cronenberg's particularly, you know, adept at. And I think, you know, The Substance, you know, I think it brings a lot of those ideas to the fore, and I think in a largely, I feel, I have reservations which we'll go into, but in a quite a successful way. And it's nice to see. Nice might be the wrong word, but you know, the body horror being deployed back in that territory again, as opposed to just being used for sort of schlock or
homage.
Which, as we've said many times, seems to be the sort of currency of the day at the moment, very much in line with, you know, nostalgia and all that sort of stuff.
Definitely.
Obviously, let's sort of park that, because I think we'll probably make a lot of references to other body horror films and stuff as we talk about The Substance. But we've obviously not long finished Revenge.
Yes.
Which is sort of Varjo's first film, I guess, put up on Mubi as a way of sort of, you know...
drumming up publicity.
Yeah, I'm all for it. I think it's a great idea. Obviously, they funded or co-funded. Was it entirely a movie production?
Revenge? Neon.
No.
The Substance. I think it might have been. You know.
Well, either there was definitely a lead player in there.
Yeah, A24 and is it A24?
No, I don't think they're involved in this one.
Oh my god! No, I guess not. I don't know why I thought it was. It's in that oeuvre, isn't it?
100%. We'll talk about that as well.
Yeah.
But like, you know, it's quite a shrewd move, and I like that they've done that, to sort of, you know, to revisit. I mean, our filmography is pretty small, but obviously it's 2 films. But you know, to go back and see that, I think it sort of benefits, I think, your overall view of her as a filmmaker to do that, or any filmmaker, I think. But anyway, that's a lot of time spent on that movie's sort of marketing campaign. I mean, we sort of said it in the intro. Difficult film to watch so early in the day.
Yeah, really quite tough at points. I think in the cinema, And if I was sort of younger, I would have maybe looked away.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been
points, 'cause
tough
it's
watch
horrible.
regardless of the time of day. But there's just something
Yeah.
about, you need just to get through the first few hours before you can be greeted with such visceral
Yes,
violence of various natures in the film.
completely. Yeah, it feels weird not to be watching this in an evening. It feels weird to not end my day with this film.
Yeah. But what a movie though.
Yeah, it's
I remember seeing it in 2017. And I remember seeing quite a discourse about it at the time, but it's like so many films that just sort of slips by and you sort of forget about it.
Yeah, I'd never seen it before either.
And it's a riff on the rape revenge film, the sort of exploitation sort of stuff that was very popular in the 80s. I was thinking a lot as I was watching the film about films like Abel Ferrara's Miss 45, which again is another sort of rape revenge film. But what I like about this film is that there's a sort of the film is not afraid to get right into the sort of gritty nature of not only the act, the sexual assault, but also the subsequent sort of violence that ensues in this sort of in the quest for revenge.
Yeah, and also the way people it sort of gets ignored by. I mean, there's only sort of chiefly in this. There's only really sort of would you take 4 characters?
4 characters, yeah.
And the other 3 characters are, they're all kind of horrible people in various ways, but they all kind of ignore it in a different way, and they all sort of brush it under the rug in a different way, and that sort of sets you up for quite a ride, quite a horrible kind of. I mean, it just makes you hate them a lot, which is ideal, because what happens after that is pretty violent and disgusting, and everyone goes through various sort of bouts of turmoil. To have a kind of strong negative feeling towards most of the characters that's happening to makes for a much more entertaining experience.
Yeah, exactly. And when I think about other films that tackle familiar subject matter, certainly the more modern age, they do tend to sort of temper the violence considerably, I guess out of respect, for the sort of
heinous nature of the act, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think obviously that's an approach that can work too, and I guess it's also the case that there's a lot of sort of discourse around the very nature of exploitation films. Who are they really for?
Yeah.
And what is it are they actually trying to achieve? And a lot of these films are still made by men for men. And there's obviously. I mean, I personally feel that there is some merit to films like Miss 45, but I certainly don't take any issue with the people that wouldn't see the merit of those kinds of films. So I think the more modern response to the sort of exploitation style films of that era is to sort of restrict the violence, restrict the sort of full frontal or explicit nature in which they cover sexual violence. But this film certainly doesn't do that, and I think it's very much, now having seen this and The Substance, it's very much in her style to not do that. To sort of take these things head on and to almost use the influences of those previous films and sort of invert the tropes and styles of them in subtle ways, not in a way that necessarily justifies the use of the visuals, but it gives them a sort of thematic wallop and a real sort of density that I think is very commendable.
Yeah, definitely.
And I feel like particularly in The Revenge, I think it is especially effective.
Yeah. I think one thing it did slightly confuse me, and she plays with internal logic quite a bit.
Yes, yeah.
And there's a moment in this film, kind of semi-spoilers ahead, where she basically gets pushed off a cliff and skewered by a tree.
Yeah.
And this big cliff, man.
Yeah.
Like, you're dead. And obviously, the film invites you at that moment when she wakes up to suspend your disbelief, and you it does take a little bit of a left turn at that moment where you're kind of like, okay, this is now less believable, and it exists more in a kind of heightened state.
Those films tend to.
Yeah.
And because the reality is often that nothing happens.
Yeah, completely.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, so I guess the fantastical element is almost a sort of a criticism, a societal critique in itself, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, and almost makes it easier to kind of let yourself have a bit of fun, despite the horrific nature of what's happened beforehand, and also that her wounds seem to heal, which might be very well be an intentional kind of thing.
I think
very
so.
Sort of overt message of her kind of grasping her own life as her own thing, as opposed to being a subservient person to these kind of rich boys.
Yeah.
You just have to run with it, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that's very much in the spirit of a lot of sort of horror films or thrillers more broadly. I think
Michael Myers, like never dying.
Exactly. Like I think you have to, you have to leave. You have to leave those kinds of things at the door. I think we've said this a lot, but obviously sometimes it is about escapism, but sometimes it's about curtailing realism to suit a sort of a more noble thematic intention.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt that in The Substance, that even though I still believed that coming out of The Substance, I felt that was sort of shakier than it was in The Revenge.
Yeah.
But again, we'll go into that. But no, I really dug it. I thought it was lean. It was fucking visceral. I mean, it's one of the more violent films I've seen in quite a long time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And again, it's that sort of Farge. I don't know why I can't remember.
No.
It seems to be like a sort of visual thing that she really doesn't want to shy away, and in fact, she almost lingers. She lingers on these sort of moments that a lot of filmmakers would sort of just a quick cut to, and then cut to like a reaction shot. But here, it's like lingering on, pulsating wounds or sort of these sort of jagged wood poking out of like skin, or wounds, like shotgun wounds that are just sort of pulsing. It is there's something so stomach churning about that.
Injury detail.
And it's so well done as well. I mean, the injury detail here was, the sort of practical effects were superb.
That's another thing. Briefly touch on body horrors. I think, there's a lot of discussion about computer generated imagery. I think it has its place, but not in this genre.
No,
I think that would be the last sort of the kind of dying cry of it, if it would ever transition to that, which you could argue that the remake of The Thing was really guilty of that, and that's why it put off a lot of people. Because that's got a lot of body horror in it as well.
God, what
Big
a film
time.
that is. I can't believe I've not even mentioned that.
What
a film,
And just great prosthetics, really, really, and heightened as well by, you told me the cinematographer for this works with Michael Bay a lot.
I'm pretty sure I read somewhere, I might have to double check that, but I'm pretty sure that he was someone, that they were someone that went on to work or had worked before with Michael Bay.
Makes so much sense, because it's like Blues and Oranges, it looks like a car advert, and it just sort of, it smacks of Bay. If you were to call him an auteur, his style has definitely influenced these films, much more so Revenge, and there's a very kind of over leeriness. Like Michael Bay is sort of famous for training his camera on the sort of rear ends of young women and sort of following them around, almost kind of like a voyeur.
Yeah.
And this film does it as well, but it's obviously a kind of, this is where there's, we'll discuss this more later, it sort of leans in on satire ever so slightly.
Absolutely. I mean, I just looked.
Oh, right,
Bad Boys.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I think the more recent Bad Boys films.
So there's this, the signature is just completely all over The Revenge, in a way I wasn't expecting.
And that's really interesting, the cinematographer, so his name's Robrecht Havert. He's Belgian, so I might have again fucked that up. But it's interesting that he went from something like this to Michael Bay.
Yeah. I just think it's fascinating how he was his skills were utilised to a much different extent. Yeah, no,
it's really strange that he would go on to work on those sort of either Michael Bay films or films that have got the DNA of Michael Bay in them, even if he's not working on them.
Yeah,
you're right. The camera leers, and that's a very common trope of a lot of not just Michael Bay, but films of that ilk,
Completely,
the
films made for
the
teenage
action
boys,
genre,
yeah.
particularly, there was a real obsession with the sort of saturating this sort of tanned female form that's scantily clad, typically a neon negligee or swimming attire.
Yeah.
Bathing it in light so the sweat dances off it. And
exactly. Yeah.
catching every sort of movement, which The Substance also does.
Yes, but with a much sort of older female body, which is like quite interesting. And this film, it starts and there's a moment where she's got a lollipop and glasses, right?
Yeah.
So there's a sort of Lolita thing going on,
Yeah.
and you're invited, almost you're invited to think that this woman is eye candy.
Yeah.
And so when she gets pushed off the cliff, I genuinely thought that was the end for her. I was like, she's been discarded, as typically happens in a lot of these films, like they're kind of used and then discarded, and then for her to wake up, that's when that leering camera stops.
Exactly.
Great use of that kind of the end of a visual motif. I thought that was really cool, clever.
Yes, absolutely. And it's sort of this idea that culture reflects the movement of the camera, the way the camera positions itself in terms of relative to the proximity between that and the feminine form is almost like a sort of, it is purely to stimulate, to arouse.
Yeah.
And this idea that there's a sort of deep connection between that kind of culture of trying to elicit that kind of sexual response, and then how that is actually then mirrored just in daily life, day to day within our society. And I was particularly taken by the way that was represented in Revenge, and the way the men just basically leer at her like the camera would.
Yes.
They're literally just looking at her the same way like hungry dogs would look at a dying animal. Do you know what I mean? It's like, and it's not subtle, but I don't think the exploitation genre has never been subtle. It's never been about subtlety.
No.
I think to critique it on that instance, I don't know. I mean, I think every critique is valid, or interpretation is valid for sure. But for me, that doesn't work.
Yeah, I would never criticise either of these sort of works that we're chiefly talking about for being unsubtle. They are, but they deserve to be. And in a way, it would be kind of irritating if they attempted to be more subtle, considering the heightened reality they're set in.
Yeah. Taking our discussion about the visuals a little bit further, they're almost, I've always thought Michael Bay's films are shot like a sort of the most stereotypical like hip hop, most mainstream hip hop or R&B or pop video.
Yeah.
And I think Revenge is sort of shot like that.
Yeah.
Certainly, like you say in that opening.
Yeah.
And there are even moments post sort of, as she begins her quest for revenge, where the dynamic, the camera move is the same, but the response, the intention is different.
Yeah.
It's no longer about using these sort of camera movements to elicit a sort of to stimulate.
Yeah.
It's about almost, I guess, kind of like a kind of empowerment. Or to sort of signify that that she's not going to.
It starts to linger.
This is going to spell doom.
Yeah, it starts to linger on the injuries the same way it used to sort of linger on the perfect female form at the beginning, right? That kind of idea of this sort of goddess-like figure. And then by the end, it's just it's the camera's following injuries and blood and viscera and like just chaos.
Yeah.
It's less Michael Bay's cinematography tends to travel around a lot, so it's long lenses traveling through and around objects, so you get a kind of amazing sense of scale, which is commendable. I mean, even in his shit films, it looks really like, well, it's like a car advert. That's what the car adverts do.
Yeah.
It's sort of the kind of fetishizing objects by showing you like in great detail, like
every contour.
It's always a dolly move on it. This film does it, but to a lesser extent. But the color palette is very much the same. It's
agreed.
Blues and oranges. Yeah.
What I also found interesting was the sort of dynamics between the three male characters.
Yeah.
So you've got this sort of very stereotypical sort of handsome bloke who
rich guy, probably Silicon Valley or something.
Yeah. Well, he's French.
He's French, yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe he's like the French equivalent.
Yeah. Don't know what's French for silicon. Maybe silicon is a French word. Who knows?
Maybe.
Yeah.
But he's like you say, very chiseled. Very stereotypical in the sense that he is just objectively handsome.
Yeah, Michelangelo's David, basically.
Yeah,
walking around. Yeah.
And he is in Australia with I guess, with a view to go hunting. And he has brought this woman along for the ride, and he's having an affair. He's got a wife and kids back home, wherever his home is, presumably France, in the French Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
Two of the men that arrive are friends that arrive early, and these are a trio of men that go hunting every year. As the sort of film progresses, you begin to sort of take snippets about the sort of power dynamics between the three men.
Yes.
And how he is the sort of stereotypically handsome, athletic one is the dominant figure. He's hierarchically superior to the other two men, based on fit looks, physique, perhaps his personality. That it's all sort of like weave together to create this sort of like the objectively perfect man. And these other two men are sort of stout, bit chubbier,
smaller.
Their features maybe a little bit more sort of pronounced.
They're
real
not world. Yeah,
they're not sort of, and they're almost in awe of him.
Oh yeah.
Initially,
and his sort of mistress as well.
Yeah. That's it's almost seen as, in their eyes, as an extension of him. Yeah. So it's this idea that as the film plays out, it's that these dynamics that men have between themselves are not only toxic in the way that it impacts the way men view each other, but then how that behaviour then influences them around women.
Yes.
And how they perceive women.
Yeah.
So, the guy that ends up committing the sexual assault, it's almost like a way of sort of, challenging this sort of established order.
Yeah, the hierarchy.
Based on sort of looks.
Really got that.
Strength. And as the film goes on, he's so resentful towards this man. Yeah. Because of his success, because of his looks. And it's that resentment, I think, fuels the act that spurs the rest of the film. Yeah. But also creates a sense of tension particularly between those two characters, which I thought was a really interesting element of the film. Oh, yeah. It didn't just do what I think some exploitation films do, in the sense that it just presented them as sort of very much the way that Hollywood would show women, as sort of two-dimensional objects to either progress the plot or, to service the film's more sort of dirtier and nefarious intentions.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't think about that. I like the idea, because usually it's the ringleader, and then his agenda is spread across a larger group of men. Yeah, ubiquitously. Yeah. Is that a word? Yeah, in a ubiquitous fashion. But in this film, you're right. For a start, the person who rapes the main character isn't the chiseled bloke. It's like it's his kind of subordinate who longs to become this guy, right? And then there's something going on as a sort of almost subplot between these two men, and how he's resentful because it's almost like he's saying to him, you made me commit this horrible act, and then so it's your fault, even though I did it, that has set off this chain of events. So, but then paradoxically, you've also got this main bloke being like, no, this was your fault. It's all fucking your fault. Thanks a lot. Like, you've ruined my hunting weekend.
The way in no, I think it's really interesting, and this particularly the way in which they discard her so willingly. I mean, it's pretty overt, isn't it? But that's not a criticism, but the way in which it goes back to that sort of way in which they're viewed as sort of objects for pleasure. Yeah. And little else. Yeah. Once they've served that role, they are then sort of shipped off. Yeah. No, I was really I found that sort of the dynamics between the characters, the male characters, particularly interesting in that regard. Yeah. And chiefly in the way in which those dynamics and those sort of standards that are so ingrained in the way men perceive each other ultimately end up being to the detriment, obviously, for men, but more so for women.
Yeah, yeah, completely.
And until we sort of that is taken down a few pegs.
There's a great moment in it where he tells them to turn the aircon off.
Oh, great! Yeah,
and it just hammers home the very much so that this guy's completely subordinate to this other guy, and he's constantly reminding him of that, and that fuels this tension between them.
And the idea that he would have any, that he's in any place to have any sort of sense of, moral superiority over anyone, just says something about the way in which people can carry themselves, and the way in which, men can have that sort of outward belief that they are like good people and still do horrible fucking things. It was a really sort of great line. I think one of the best lines in the film, actually, in terms of conveying so much thematically, but in such a sort of bizarre, almost quite amusing way. Really strange. But it's just a great movie. I was really struck by it, and the violence in the film is at points it's really.
It's hard to watch. Yeah, it's hard to watch. Very,
and I think it should be, given the nature of what what is trying to be achieved, and what is and the decisions that have been made to confront this subject, to invert things, but primarily to confront this subject head on. I think it's not supposed to be an experience which is going to be easy.
Yeah,
and I think that's so important. I think it's so important to the overall ideas around the film, and I think it's, it's not something necessarily to watch at Christmas.
Oh, yeah.
I think these kinds of films I think there's a real importance to them.
And it's funny how the way we're talking about it makes it sound quite unwatchable. But I probably would stick this on. You know what I mean? It's quite fun. There's a detachment.
Very slick.
Yeah, and it's just interesting, quite fun to watch the tension unfold, and there's like a lot going on in terms of there's real sort of stakes. The stakes feel quite big, even though they're actually quite small. And it was kind of a weird mix of a popcorn flick and a slightly deeper comment on male behaviour.
That's the thing about exploitation cinema is, it often uses sort of horror, particularly, obviously, or action. They tend to be the sort of genres which are the foundational layer for these sort of exploitation films. So it would only make sense that in the sense of The Revenge, that those elements were really well refined and really well crafted. She's a very sort of sensory filmmaker, I think. I think she really is interested in those little details. The sort of very granular feeling details, like insects walking on rotting fruit, or like the bit when he pisses on a sort of spider. Like really sort of like Nicholas Roeg-esque, which is interesting, obviously, given Walkabout. And I think there is some kind of like thematic similarities, certainly in the way that they're sort of visualized.
Definitely,
definitely a reference, I think.
Oh, big time, yeah. There's an iguana in it as well.
Yeah. I thought sometimes, and again, I think this is definitely more the case in The Substance. I think every now and again there's perhaps a little bit too much of it. I know there's one of the central plot points in the film is that she takes this
it's peyote, I think.
Peyote, and
hallucinogenic cactus.
So I think that kind of allows sort of a visually liberating moment, but to me I just feel like it's a bit much, but
a bit unnecessary perhaps. To
me it's a very minor niggle, and it's not something, at the end of the day the film's still great with it or without it, but
the hallucinogenic drug it does serve the plot. That she has to cauterize this horrendous wound, and the only way she can deal with the pain is by taking it. But then there's a bit. I agree with you. There's a bit of an indulgence right afterwards, where it's like, I have a bit of a trippy, kind of fast-paced editing. It's an hour 48. It doesn't, you can trim that off, perhaps. I didn't mind it because I quite like that sort of editing style. Bit of weird to see sort of archival footage of iguanas, though. But it's funny. But like, there is definitely a kind of well, not even it kind of plays into the themes about humanity's power over animals, especially in that moment where he's pissing on the spider. It's just
it's a reflection of man's hubris, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He just for fun, he's going to drown a spider
In piss.
Yes. Oh god.
Yeah.
Just to kind of say, and it's great that it's his character that does that, because it's him regaining a sense of control, I suppose,
Over something so minute in a situation where he has no control.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How he sort of men like that lust for that power in any way that they can drip feed it to themselves.
Yeah. Drip being the operative word.
Yes, unintentionally but totally apt. Great film, really worth it, and I think it was worth having a little dig into that. Firstly, because I don't think we've ever done that where we've watched a film, it's so fresh in our mind that we could. Because usually we have like a cinema trip and then we'll have to drive home.
A couple of days, maybe.
Yeah. Doing that, yeah. And I think going into The Substance, I wonder if it would have been better to watch this before. I don't know.
Maybe. I was more taken with Revenge than I was with The Substance, ultimately.
Okay.
We'll go into that a bit later. I quite liked absorbing myself in the director's work right before talking about her. It was just nice to do that. I don't know if they need to be ingested in any particular order.
I guess that's not. Yeah, I guess
It is weird watching a debut after the sophomore effort. Though.
Yeah,
for sure. The comparing the two might be slightly unfair, but
they're very different movies in the sense that, as you said, sort of quite near the start of the episode, it's like. This is like a sort of it's almost like a revenge action film. In many ways.
Yeah.
Whereas The Substance is very much a body horror, like a sort of more slow paced, more meditative sort of,
more overtly, more overt social commentary. I'd say.
Yeah, I think with the sort of the leanness of the narrative, I think it's interesting that. It feels so lean, but there's so much richness. But the richness, thematically speaking, is contained within that genre.
Yeah,
more so, and that's not to the film's detriment. I think you could definitely unpick that, and it could, and you could apply a lot of it to, a lot more than just, a story of revenge. But I think The Substance has a sort of broader thematic range, purely on the way in which it is exploring the way in which we perceive the female body and the way that its body is commodified, and how it is treated at various stages of its life.
Yeah, absolutely.
With that, I guess let's sort of go into that and The Substance. A film that I guess before we started going into the thematic nitty gritty that I just have, but let's just park that for a moment. It feels really, it's really interesting to me that this film is so popular, and I guess that and I don't mean that I think that it shouldn't be, because it absolutely should, but I just think that given that it's marketing itself as this sort of grim experience, I don't know, like I find that it's sort of like a throwback to the sort of like video nasties kind of era.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Which, obviously the video nasties era is kind of oppositional thematically to this kind of film in lots of ways.
It's daring you to watch it though. That's the idea behind it's a marketing move, isn't it? It's like, oh, go on, see if you can handle it. See if you faint. See if you if it makes you feel sick. Go on, see how this film will affect you. That's the definite move, the push behind it for sure. And then maybe you're almost. I can imagine some people who don't know a lot about the story might be conned into a sort of a bit of a different experience and what they were thinking. Maybe
it's like The Revenant.
I
feel like The Revenant was that film that everyone thought was going to be like a real sort of actiony, like survival film, like The Grey. And what they got was kind of like
Leonardo DiCaprio eating raw bison liver,
just staring out into the fucking snow for a bit. I mean, I quite liked that film, but I vividly remember people leaving the cinema going, that was shit.
Oh, right.
Because they totally expected that the kind of film more akin to like a Liam Neeson action vehicle. And by the way, I love The Grey, so I'm not saying that. But it's like, and I feel like that sort of marketing approach is going to do that to this film.
It will.
I don't know if it's sort of. I understand that they have to do that because. You invest quite a lot into a movie, you want to get as many bums on seats as possible, and I guess once the sort of critical consensus is out, you're not really. Obviously, you want people to like what you fucking made. Obviously,
Yeah.
I think from a marketing perspective, as long as those bums are on seats initially, it doesn't really matter how they leave those seats.
No,
they've already paid.
Yeah.
So you're going to get a lot of people going in there expecting like a more straight-laced sort of horror film, and they're not going to get that.
No, they won't. No.
And that will probably rub a few people the wrong way. And that's what I find quite interesting about the marketing approach. It's very much in line with like, you know, the way in which a lot of more familiar horror films are marketed. It's about the shock factor above all else. So the sort of shocking nature of the film is primary, and the story is usually secondary. I'm not, you know, there's some great horror films that do that really well, but in more contemporary times, you know, sort of just a way to pass an hour and a half, isn't it? And to me, it's sort of interesting that like a company like Mubi are marketing it that way, and it just goes to show that, you know, even, you know, our beloved production companies have got to play by the rules of the sort of broader industry rules in order to sort of make their money back.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, it's an interesting tactic, but it's working. You know, people are talking about this. People we know, you normally maybe might not have even heard of Mubi, are quite jazzed to see this, and people at work are quite interested in what I had to say about it, which is, you know, it's working.
Yeah, and I think it's cool that, you know, I like it when a film, ultimately, as much as I sort of find it a bit strange that they're doing that, like, you know, I like that. I like that people who never would consider films like this or films of this sort of ilk, you know, because there can be a sort of, you know, I guess sort of by the very nature of these kinds of films, the sort of Mubi films particularly, they do tend to get released in settings that are sort of more for a specific audience.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, for example, art house cinemas tend to be frequented by a certain kind of person.
Yes.
It's either people that are really into movies or people that can afford
going on a date, trying to impress a date. Maybe.
Yeah. Or people that are of a certain, you know, financial position.
Yeah.
You know,
middle
which
class,
I think which is, you know, we've talked about the problematic nature of that before when we talked about the old oak. So, like, you know, I like it when a film breaks out of that mold.
Yes,
and it appeals to a broader scope, because you want that. You know, I would just want people to enjoy movies. I want all kinds of movies. You know, that's I think that's really special. And what I will say, the film is obviously not quite as, you know, it is very much a Mubi A24 style movie in sort of the way it's paced.
Yeah.
But the audience participation was, you know, was lovely.
Yeah.
It was a lovely thing to be a part of.
Yeah, definitely. Seeing it with a crowd was quite nice, actually. I ended up seeing it in Newport, in a cinema in Newport, and it was actually quite a popular film there as well. And there was the reactions, hearing the reactions around you really helped with the experience.
Yeah. It's funny because we talk about that in the context of like Barbie, which I think this film's got quite a lot of thematic similarities to.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, like, say what you will about the film and it's sort of, you know, thematically, you know, themes, especially when those themes are set back against the sort of grinding wheels of a hyper-capitalist industry. But, you know, the audience participation made that film probably more enjoyable than it would have been had I watched it just at home.
Yeah.
And it's funny, my partner and our friends watched it, and they really weren't that taken with it. And it's interesting because I thought it'd be like a kind of like, I thought it would chime quite well with them. But I think it was because of that sort of the audience participation elevates films, and it makes them more enjoyable and a more collectively cathartic and experience.
Yeah.
And I was, you know, so on the basis of that marketing move, maybe, you know, even though I'm a bit like, oh, it's a bit annoying when they have like, you know, black and white footage of audience members sort of like, you know, looking in shock or aghast.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, fucking hell, like, but I guess you sort of have to play by those rules if you want films to touch a broader audience.
Yeah, if you want to create a kind of atmosphere around an atmosphere of shock and awe around it, then yeah, it's a way to do it, isn't it? It's like the same that the Paranormal Activity method. It's cheap as well. Getting someone to sit in a chair and go, oh.
Yeah. It really echoes a certain time of cinema which is sort of no longer there anymore. I think we talked about this when we talked about Barbie, but you know, it's you know, that sort of the relationship. I mean, I'm very much a purist when I go to the cinema. I don't like to be distracted too much, but I love those experiences when you're invited to have them, when a film invites you. And it's a shame we don't have more of those, really.
Yeah,
they feel like they're quite few and far between.
Yeah, agreed.
And it really was kind of evocative of a certain era, which I wasn't really privy to, but when you read stories about the sort of midnight cinemas and all that kind of stuff, it felt, again, I'm sort of subjecting those things I've read to like my own sort of vague approximation of what it may have been like, but it feels like that. It feels like a sort of like, not like an act of subversion to go and see it, but it's sort of vaguely maybe.
Yeah, definitely. You see something different. Because I think a lot of horror films come and go these days. Even if they make $30 million, they only cost $2 million to make. It's like they get forgotten. Blumhouse do it a lot. They just release something and it will make money, but not that much money. But it doesn't matter. And it's nice to see some real hype surrounding a film with such shock value. Helped, I think, by Demi Moore and her casting. Because that is, I mean, it's genius casting in that there's real life parallels there, and that she's an actor who has, in the traditional sense, and I actually don't think this at all, but she's kind of had her heyday in that she's experienced
in the eyes of the industry. She's
exactly,
had her heyday.
She absolutely hasn't.
No,
but there was a time where she was traditionally, just because of her age, that she was a sex symbol, and she is not a sex symbol anymore. So her, there's a kind of definite real life parallel there. But yeah, I mean, she's still very much in the industry, and she's got a body of work behind her, and it's just I thought that it was sort of genius casting, and
fantastic,
she has some chops as well. She's very, very good in this. She definitely knows what material she's working with. Yeah, and she does well to kind of play into that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's when it feels like to her it's almost like a lived-in experience.
Yeah.
And it's bringing that to the fore in the performance.
I think she would elicit a response from a potential audience member, and that, oh god, I've forgotten about her.
Yeah. So which in itself is testament to how fucking wretched the industry can be to older actresses.
It plays into the film's message perfectly, because it would, even before seeing the film, you have been a participant in the sort of in the thing it's criticising. I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's just another way that another kind of marketing push, I think. In that respect.
Yeah, absolutely, and it certainly benefits the movie hugely. I thought she was possibly the best thing about the film, actually.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Margaret Qualley was also great, really good. But I thought Demi Moore. I think just having someone, like you say, having someone in there that has lived that experience, that has gone from this sort of, the way in which the industry treats women, and it has a long-standing history of, in classic Hollywood, it was, changing women's names. I mean, they did this with men too, but, they changed women's names. They would, force certain things upon them.
Oh, to be more Hollywood.
Yeah.
Really?
And the way that sort of, as Hollywood has grown and the sort of, there's been seismic shifts within the industry, but what's been a constant is those attitudes about sort of, sex appeal. Yeah. Above all else.
Yeah,
and finding roles and ways in which that sex appeal can sort of be as present as possible in films. And then obviously getting to a certain point where your sex appeal is deemed to have dwindled.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting in the sense of the substance, how it represented how the people that judge that are people that are older, old men. They're judging that. They're going, well, that's not sexy anymore.
Yeah.
And then they sort of put you out to pasture.
Yeah.
And you're just left in obscurity to sort of wrestle with, you know, your past and your legacy, and how that sort of looms over you like a sort of, you know, it's like a spectoral, you know, it's you know,
because
really interesting.
We talk about nostalgia quite a lot in a negative sense, in that it can be quite painful to look back. And so I suppose what the film is saying is, imagine that amped up to 11, right? So like, imagine not only are you doing what everyone does, is looking back over their childhood and their teen years and their early 20s and kind of thinking that it was a better time, and yearning after that time, but imagine everyone around you also doing that to you and having billboards of people who, you know, it's just imagine how painful that would be. The film does that. It's in the first 2 acts, it really, really hones down on that fantastically. I really liked that.
I guess more broadly, the way society treats age anyway is pretty weird. Like, you know, it's almost encouraged to think about it as this sort of, you know, you're coming to the end, and your body and mind is degrading, and everything you were is long gone, and is soon to be gone permanently.
And the people who are that age currently don't care about you. That kind of thing.
You know, you are sort of you're physically and socially and ideologically just adrift. You know, like, you're not a part of it. And I think it's perhaps amplified in the case of, you know, of the sort of being a woman, in the sense that, you know, you are subjected to that sort of scrutiny in a far more intense manner because of the way in which you are viewed as, you know, your sort of, your sexuality is an intrinsic part of your screen presence. And at least in the eyes of the people that are orchestrating it behind the scenes.
And it's sort of portrayed as a sin that it hasn't been preserved over the years.
Like it's your fault.
I can't believe you let yourself go like this. I can't believe that you were driven to get lip fillers. Like, you're disgusting. You know, that kind of thing. It's like, of course she's going to fucking do that. And of course, it's why another reason, because there's a kind of plot device in the film in which he makes the decision to use this substance, which is an anti-aging kind of form of anti-aging technology, very science fiction, very not rooted in reality at all. But it's the same concept as foundation, you know, removing wrinkles and stuff like that.
The advert is almost framed like that, isn't it? Like this kind of
Maybelline.
Like,
it looks like a fucking Maybelline advert.
The way in which, you know, you're fighting a war with the inevitable in the hope that you can stem the tide and therefore be accepted more broadly. And, you know, again, like, having Demi Moore in that role, it really cements and hammers home those themes in a far more meaningful way. As someone that, you know, I've watched interviews with her who's had to, you know, endure that, and even as the cultural landscape is slowly shifting, there is still, you know, a large part of the industry is still completely held together by those sort of archaic belief systems. And, you know, and why is that? It's obviously because people are still responding to that and what that still says. And I think that's what makes the film, I'm sort of resistant to use terms like urgent. But, you know what I mean? Like, it does give the film a sort of a thematic wallop. Because, you know, it is still very much a thing, I think.
Definitely. I was just thinking about Blade Runner 2049 for some reason, and how it's perfectly normal and natural to cast a older Harrison Ford in his cameo as Rick Deckard, but Sean Young is presented with the kind of de-aging technology, computer generated, very well done computer generated. But there's an interview with Sean Young, and it's basically talking about I think it was Sean Young and Kelly McGillis from Top Gun and Witness, and they were just talking about exactly what we're talking about now. It's just like, we don't get cast in anything anymore, and they kind of like it's quite a somber, sad sort of moment between them.
It's interesting, isn't it, that Harrison Ford, like so many of these sort of, you know, we talked about legacy sequels quite recently, but you know, they're almost going to be okay.
Like,
they will, I mean, you know, they're almost, you know, they know, maybe they don't know, but, you know, there's this almost like in the sort of cultural landscape as it is, they're going to be back and they're going to reprise these roles, and it doesn't matter that they're wrinkly or they sort of shuffle around like a puffin. You know, like, it doesn't matter. Like,
right into the
it's
script.
Fine. They're old. Like that makes sense. But they're almost given that. It's almost their process of aging is given an agency that. You know, like you say, the sort of female characters or the female actresses that play those characters aren't given.
Yeah.
I'd never thought of it in the context of that film, but that is true.
Yeah, I quickly before moving on. Another film that popped into my head in this same context is, on the flip side, is Back to the Future, where it's young actors being aged up. So in this case, Marty McFly's parents, because I think Robert Zemeckis, one of the reasons he wrote Back to the Future was because he was sort of he kind of had a realization that his parents once were as young as he was and had the same desires as he is currently having now.
Yeah.
And I thought, just it sort of weirdly relates to what we're talking about now.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but there we go.
Yeah. That's interesting,
Yeah.
I guess that's sort of like, in a way, celebrating age.
Yeah. You're completely on the flip side, it's kind of explaining to audiences, like, that everyone was your age once, like you're not invincible. But in a kind of weirdly positive way. It's another reason why Disney rejected the screenplay for Back to the Future.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because of the themes they considered it to be a sort of slightly incestual theme running through it, whereas actually it was just about being, youthful and young. I think the substance, it's just a nice sort of refreshing. I mean, refreshing is a weird word to use because it's such a horrible thing that's happening.
Yeah.
But it's set in this like heightened reality where, I mean, literally the TV executive is called Harvey, and there's a moment. That's a very blatant nod.
Yeah.
And also, there's a moment where he's eating loads of shrimp.
Yeah.
Which is a nod to, I think, the thing that happened with Brett Ratner. And that,
okay.
Do you remember that weird thing with the shrimp prawn to Olivia Munn? Yeah. So there's a lot of very, very, very obvious nods, and it bends into satire in that way.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day in terms of the film's sort of satirical element. I think it'll be a good opportunity to talk about that a little bit before we go back into the film. But I was thinking about how the satire in this film is deployed. And on the one hand, it's sort of very much about something that isn't subtle. The rampant sort of sexism in the industry that is well entrenched for all to see. Yeah, and it is almost an essential part of the industry's formation and the way in which people get roles and get jobs and how they keep work.
Yeah,
they have to sort of constantly placate this sort of rampant sort of horniness. That is prepared to just forego any sort of sense of decency to be satiated. So that is pretty explicit. If you read, it's funny because I read stuff like Easy Riders, Raging Bulls, which is like a sort of revisits the golden age of New Hollywood, and it almost shines a sheen on it. And obviously I love that era, so I'm kind of down for that. But you sort of read it again and you think, well, actually, this is such a seedy, weird time. I guess that was one of the criticisms that was actually kind of levelled at Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, was that it didn't really address that. Which I can sort of understand for sure. But, it is an industry that is, by its nature, quite seedy in lots of ways. And the overt nature of that is becoming more and more apparent in the post sort of Me Too era, when people come out and having these stories and the way in which these people men behaved in environments that they were relying on the fact that they were in a dominant position, that no one was going to question it, and even if people thought it was fucked up, they couldn't afford to challenge it on the basis of losing their position. And they became sort of bystanders, which which doesn't mean they're completely devoid of blame, but they're bystanders to this horror. So there's a ubiquity to it. And when I thought about it in that way, the sort of very heavy-handed satirical elements in the film worked.
Yeah, I think they did. I mean, like sort of Dennis Quaid's using a really weird fisheye lens whenever he's on.
It's very Terry Gilliam, wasn't it?
Oh, big time. Yeah, that's actually a really good comparison. I didn't quite consider that. And sort of slightly Lynchian as well, that sort of accentuation of his ugliness, I suppose. Not Dennis Quaid's ugliness, but the
Sorry,
character. Yeah. He's listening. He's like, I love this podcast. Oh.
It's got me ugly. You fuckers.
Our analytics just dropped by 1.
No, so. But on the other hand, I was thinking about this more broadly. in terms of sort of A24 movie era movies that have sort of satirical intentions. There does seem to be a sort of penchant for these filmmakers just to sort of go, right, last 30 minutes, go fucking mental.
Yeah.
And because I thought that like Beau is Afraid was a bit like that.
Yep.
You know, in the sense that it's like they've got all of these themes and they get to the end and they just go, and just get fuck it,
as if it wasn't already obvious enough to us.
And I began to wonder about it in that context. Like, we're obviously going through, independent cinema has obviously been on the ropes for a long time, and it's companies like A24 and Mubi that are really keeping those fires burning, producing some amazing stuff. There's no doubt they've produced some fantastic films, and we're thankful for them.
Yes.
But there just seemed to be this sort of like, I don't know, like a sort of narrative through line through a lot of these films that I guess when it's like the sort of satirical intentions are so noble, there's almost like a fearlessness in the way that they're deployed. And that fearlessness can sometimes veer into heavy-handedness. And that heavy-handedness almost makes the films feel like a spectacle they're almost standing outside of the things they're satirizing. Do you know what I mean? There's a sort of distance that again, like, I know that particularly in the case of The Substance, the film is by and large viewed very positively by a lot of people because of that sort of excess and what the things we were talking about earlier in terms of the nature of the industry it's satirizing isn't subtle. So that makes sense. But there does seem to be this sort of this modern obsession with just going fucking balls out the bath by the end, and I wonder, how effective that is. Really,
it didn't need it at all. It had its themes. It grasped its themes by the horns, but it didn't really need to ride them quite as maniacally as it did. I think it was an off-putting third act for me, not because of the violence. That was. Although that did get overbearing, but there was an intention behind it. But just the way in which the kind of monstrosity emerged from it, I thought like it was a bit. It just felt like a different film all of a sudden. It felt more like Slither than it did Videodrome all of a sudden.
It's like a wackiness, isn't it? It's almost wacky, cartoonish.
Yeah.
And the film is wacky and cartoonish, particularly, you talk about the presentation of Dennis Quaid's character for sure, but I felt the way it felt, those moments sort of felt, they burst and then contained.
Yeah.
A burst and they sort of fluctuated throughout the narrative, and I thought the way they were sort of peppered throughout worked. But I'm with you, man. I did enjoy it because of that audience participation.
Okay.
I think if I was on my own watching it, I'd be a lot less enamoured with that ending.
Okay, right,
but it was brilliant. In the watershed, it was packed. Everyone was like laughing and going, what the fuck is going on? And verbally exclaiming that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that was quite wonderful.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't get that, actually, with...
In Newport.
No, that might be why.
No disrespect to Newport. We've just lost the analytics. We're looking at the analytics. We've lost Dennis Quaid. And the population of Newport
isn't listening
God,
anymore.
That is like at least 75% gone.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it wasn't quite as busy, or the cinema. It was a multiplex, so it's a big, horrible multiplex actually. But I don't know. I just thought it was a bit of a waste ultimately. Not that it didn't detract from the strength of the first two acts that preceded it, but it did kind of leave me a bit listless by the end. I was just like, I kind of have the message in my head, and that's all very good, and there was a lot to love about it, but it would have been lovely had it ended like how the Revenge ended, which was sort of with a neat little bow, and this just became like there was sort of almost it almost reminded me of, and I love this film, the bit in The Elephant Man where he gets pushed around by the sort of people who think he's a sort of circus freak. But in the context of this film, I didn't think it needed that. It just felt like a kind of big showcase of nastiness and excess. She effectively, what happens is she begins to age at an accelerated rate.
Yeah, because her younger clone is taking more
taking her
fluid
time.
from her. Yeah,
Yeah,
more
yeah.
time, yeah.
And she becomes this sort of horrible kind of. She
She
redoes
re-injects the substance, so
that's right.
the sort of younger clone injects herself.
Yeah. And again, there's an internal logic thing there which was sort of discarded. And like, why would it be birthed again? I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I missed something, but yeah, it just became a bit of a monster flick by the end.
Yeah.
Kind of tortured monster.
It felt like a James Whale sort of like Universal Monsters Frankenstein thing.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
not very good.
Not really, no. Just overt and unnecessary. And the film has quite a hefty runtime, 2 hours 20. So it was just.
It was
odd.
too long.
It was too long.
It was too long.
Yeah.
I know you say this quite a lot, and I tend to be a bit softer on that.
Yeah.
But I'm completely with you. It was too long.
Yeah.
You could have at least. I reckon you could have shaved 20 minutes off easily.
Yeah, definitely. I think maybe another pass at the third act, just in terms of screenwriting, seeing where you could take it, because you could take it to a lot of different places. It could end. The ending could be quite somber and downtrodden, and it would have been quite effective, I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
It's interesting because on the one hand, I did really enjoy the ending, just on the basis of that audience experience. But I just thought thematically it didn't really serve a lot of the narrative, because I just felt that, like you said, it's sort of the sort of wackiness of the film would burst, but felt quite contained. And there was a sort of Gilliam-esque distortion, both sort of like visually and narratively. There's like the men that bang on the door or the executives. It felt like this sort of real, like it sort of stomach churning institutional critique that worked really well.
Yeah,
and certainly in the way it sort of showed the sort of ground level way in which people have just responded to this kind of culture that has sort of permeated throughout human society since Hollywood's inception. Do you know what I mean? And the culture that followed that, and I found that to be really, really great, and some really great moments. I thought some of the best moments in the film were sort of just like Demi Moore being sort of in this room on her own.
Yeah,
and I thought that was like it was like a claustrophobic sort of chamber piece, and it sort of worked. And
yeah, she was just looking at herself, wasn't she?
Yeah, what a performance. But I found that sort of quite interesting. And again, visually, the film in a sort of similar style to Revenge, there is a sort of a Michael Bay leeriness in the way it sort of shoots, particularly Margaret Qualley.
Yeah, big time. And also the sort of dance sequences, which she's meant to be this part of this TV show, which is kind of this broadcast platform of her doing exercise videos.
Yeah.
The way that shot harks back massively to the kind of opening of Revenge. In the way it's kind of hyper sexualized, sort of very hot color palette. Lurid and shopping channel-y, and look at this. Distracted,
like the way in which the sort of material stretches over the flesh, and barely conceals it, but it's just to give a sort of suggestion to the viewer to enough to sort of generate a sort of arousal. But in the context of the film, it has the complete opposite effect, which is a testament to the sort of, again, the thematic brilliance and the way in which the camera is deployed in that way.
It's sort of, again, another kind of a reference to Showgirls, or that kind of style of filmmaking. I thought, because we talk about Showgirls quite a lot, but, like there is that sort of commitment to, what the film is satirizing in sort of really wallowing in it and creating that sort of awkward relationship between the reality in the film and the satire. Which I thought the Substance didn't necessarily stick the landing with completely, but I think for the most part it did. It was really good. I also quite liked the way it presented that, like the way in which I felt there was a sort of comment about the sort of nature of how industry executives sort of shrink wrap, sexuality and remarket it as empowerment, even though the approach is very much the same. And I think we talk about this quite a lot, and I think there's a lot of discussions more broadly about the way in which, like, particularly for example in the context of Disney, Okay,
when they try and do something that's seen as progressive, a lot of people are suspicious of it. Not because they have issues with the progressive intention, but the way the intention is marketed.
Yes,
it's a marketing move. Is there a genuine desire to showcase a certain culture or whatever? Who knows? Probably not. You know?
Yeah.
So I thought that was quite interesting that the film. The elements of that dance thing, it's all about betterment and making yourself better, but is it really?
Yeah.
Is it really for that? And the idea that the media executives try and pull the wool over your eyes when really they know exactly what it is they're selling and what they want to get out of it.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, Phil does that really well. Having this kind of gang of suited guys just wandering around this set, kind of. Just their heads are constantly being turned by sort of these models. Yeah, and there's a scene where her teeth are falling out.
Yeah,
and she has to smile at them and appease them in that way, just by smiling and not saying anything. And they the fact that they don't notice, I think, is quite funny.
Yeah. They're not like, oh, is she all right?
Yeah, no, they're just like, oh, she's beautiful.
Yeah.
Smarmy, overt, but. Again, in that scene, it was really effective. I liked that moment quite a lot, actually.
Yeah, and that was towards the end of the film as well. That's probably one of the better moments.
Yeah. Before it went full, sort of horrifying, monstery nonsense. It did have the lead up to that was still quite effective. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Agreed.
Nice.
But yeah, no, I think I will have sort of reservations about the ending for a while. It's going to be one of those things. I don't know if it's ever going to be like, not that it really matters what, but is it ever? The reservations ever going to end? Do you know what I mean? It feels like one of those films in the sense that I can see why it was done, and I sort of appreciate it on that basis. But at the same time, I really don't get why it was included.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if I'm ever going to reconcile that. There's been a few films like that recently that have done things, and I think I can't form a definitive opinion about aspects of them.
Yeah.
And I think this is just going to be ongoing. I'd be interested to see if it gets put to bed with a rewatch, whenever that would be. It'd be quite nice to rewatch it with a group of friends, I think, in a living room on a film night or something.
Yeah, that'd be quite good, actually. Yeah, no, maybe in a
particularly with people that perhaps are a little bit less sort of horror literate. I love doing that.
Yeah.
It's quite sort of, but no, it's I think by and large, certainly the first half to 3/4, this is a really strong piece of body horror cinema that absolutely evokes the sort of brilliance of Cronenberg et al.
Yes,
and I think cements
Fargo,
her place as someone to sort of definitely keep an eye on, because I think what I like about her is that even if that stylistic success doesn't always do it for me, like, she's going to keep doing that, and I think that's something that's why not?
Oh man, there's a lovely simplicity about both of the films that of hers that I've watched. I think the only two, I guess. They're very kind of easily digestible as a concept.
There's a leanness, and I think you said this in regards to revenge, but the revenge, but it's like, you surrender yourself to that logic and you're going to have way more fun.
Yeah, oh god, yeah. And it's easy for people to pick it apart the way that you can pick Gravity apart for being, in terms of being a space movie, an unrealistic space movie. That doesn't matter. Like, if you get behind the concept, that doesn't matter. Like, you need to suspend your disbelief. And if you do that, then you can have a much more enjoyable time.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Good film.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Outro.
Questing the cinematic void.
There we have it then.
Oh yes. Enjoyed that, and it was nice to watch a film and immediately talk about it. We should do that more often.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that was really cool to just have that really fresh in my memory.
Because so many times when we'll be talking about a film, I'll just forget really basic details, like character names or like key plot points.
Yeah, even like Videodrome for me today, I was like, I don't remember anything about this film.
It's mad, isn't it? I often wonder about stuff like, what the fuck is the point? Like, if I watch something and I just can't remember it.
Yeah.
What I have to do is, I do it quite a lot of preparation for the podcast, is that I'll quickly read through a synopsis and it'll resurrect. And if I really can't remember, I'll watch like key scenes on YouTube and I'll be like, oh yeah, and then it all falls back into place then.
Yeah.
So it goes to show it is there. It's just The mundanity of life sort of destroys.
Yeah,
We've lost more viewers.
it's why you
Listeners.
should rewatch stuff. I think. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm going to rewatch
yeah.
Videodrome. I think.
And I can be a bit funny about rewatching stuff. I quite like to just watch new films all the time.
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
get quite annoyed by the idea of watching, particularly if I've seen them fairly recently. But there's so much merit to it, and I need to sort of train my brain to think better about that.
Nice.
Next week, well, actually, we've got our next two films lined
We
up.
do, yeah.
I know we sort of said we were going to stay in the independent realm, but I guess you could sort of argue that Megapolis is sort of independent, because it was self-funded. A lot of it, wasn't it?
Yeah, he sold his wine empire, Ford Coppola, for this film, and did a. Yeah, or at least that's how it's been advertised. I don't know if that's true.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah. This is. I think Megalopolis is an independent effort for sure.
Yeah.
I could definitely be considered that. It's done the festival circuit, etc. So
it's another sort of big swing for the fences kind of movie.
Yeah,
I feel this film has Southland Tales vibes.
Oh, massively. Yeah. Definitely in its sort of ambitiousness.
Yeah.
And just bravado, I suppose.
Yes, and I've seen snippets. I think I saw a bit of a trailer against my will, and I've obviously, being on social media, you hear a lot of buzz or conversations around it, even if you don't necessarily want to. It seems to be a film that's really baffled a lot of people, so in the same way Southland Tales did. So
yes,
I'm interested to see that. For lots of reasons, and we'll go into those next week.
Absolutely.
The week after, Joker, Folie à Deux. I think my sort of disliking of the first Joker is pretty well documented on this podcast. So I'm expecting it to be shit because I don't really like the first one that much at all. Serviceable in lots of areas, but thematically and all that sort of stuff, I really didn't like it. But we'll go into that in 2 weeks' time. We'll save that, even though it's really tempting to get into it. But so they're the next two films. So I hope they align with your desired watches.
Yes.
If
definitely.
not, well, you've got an excuse to now.
Yeah. Go and watch both those films immediately.
So Dennis Quaid, if you haven't left, please watch those two films, and The Population of Newport. In the meantime, thank you for listening, as always.
Thank you very much.
Have a good one. We'll catch you next one.
See you then. Bye.
Keep it easy. Fuck
Keep it easy.
Why not?
Yeah.